Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lines.
Uncertainty returns, if it ever went away. Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power as President Xi tries to rewrite the geopolitical map, just as an appeals court rules that most of the Trump tariff regime is illegal. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kriti, Gupta in Washington. We've got a lot to talk about today as lawmakers also return to town with just over a dozen working days to avoid a government shutdown. So it's back to work, back to school, and in your case, Kriti, Gupta, back to the USA. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like the timing is perfect. It's almost like I planned it this way.
Well, you definitely picked a peculiar time to be here. We're counting down to a potential government shutdown at the end of this month. As I mentioned, tariffs are up in the air right now, and as lawmakers come back to deal with the Jeffrey Epstein story and everything else, we do have a lot of questions to answer around here. This tariff move, you must have been in the air somewhere between London and the United States when that happened, as the markets have been on edge today, too.
I mean, it feels like the markets have been on edge since Liberation Day, really, and they've been looking for a reason to really respond. And you would have thought that having that court appeals kind of work against Donald Trump would be a positive for these markets, and we're not seeing that today.
Well, we're not, because I guess we still don't know what's going to happen. He's going to keep appealing this and could rewrite the whole tariff regime. And so we want to start with the markets. As always, we'll bring you a live report from the White House coming up from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. We'll talk to Michelle Jamrisko about this fascinating session in China, the meeting in China, and Henrietta Levin will join us from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, all after a look at the markets. Lisa Mathieu has that for us from World Headquarters in New York. Lisa, how's it look?
You got it, Joe and Kriti. Well, Wall Street kind of returning from the long holiday weekend on a down note. This week, traders, well, they're looking ahead to key labor market data, looking for any clues on economic growth, the path of interest rates. So right now, if we take a look at the NASDAQ, it's down more than 1.5%. We have the Dow down about 0.9%. The S&P 500 down more than 1%. In the yield space, we have the 2-year 3.65%. That's up 4 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year 4.27%, and that's up about 4 basis points. Over to commodities, we have COMEX gold. It hit a record right now at $3,591 an ounce. Over to oil, we'll go to WTI crude, up more than 2.5% at $65 a barrel. The Bloomberg dollar spot index up about 0.4%. Checking with the British pound, down more than 1%. The euro down about 0.5%. The Japanese yen down about 0.7%. Few companies making news. We'll start with Anthropic. It has closed a deal to raise $13 billion from investors. It's a new funding round that nearly triples its valuation to $183 billion. Then Kraft Heinz, they say they plan to split into 2 publicly traded companies. One will include Heinz ketchup and other condiments. The second's going to include slower growing grocery products. Shares, though, down more than 6.5%. Activist investor Elliott Investment Management, it's built a $4 billion stake in PepsiCo. And finally, the U.S. has pulled Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing's waiver to freely ship those essential gear to its main Chinese chip-making base. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, you can subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mathieu. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Lisa Mathieu, thank you so much. Watching Wall Street for us. We'll get back to Lisa in New York about 20 minutes from now to check in on the Tuesday trade, even though we all want to say it's the Monday trade. Still reacting on this Tuesday, feels like a Monday session, to the news of late Friday. What we like to call the Friday news dump, in fact, came from an appeals court and a pretty important ruling here that called into question the entire basis, the emergency status for President Trump's tariff regime. It would impact most, if not all, of those tariffs. And it coincides with a remarkable moment overseas, President Xi hosting Vladimir Putin and India's Prime Minister Modi for a visit that Bloomberg is asking whether is rewriting the geopolitical map as we know it. We're going to talk to Michelle Jamrisko about that in just a couple of minutes. But let's start at the White House. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is standing by on the North Lawn right now. We are expecting to hear from President Trump a little bit later on today. Tyler, what do you have?
Yeah, hey, Joe. So this ruling really is dominating the headlines after the weekend, though it did come out perhaps on the quiet end, considering that it was 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday night. Now, this really has to do with those tariffs enacted under IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and the court found that President Trump violated his authority because, as you well know, in order to invoke IEEPA, the president had to declare a national emergency. So for those so-called reciprocal tariffs, he cited persistent global trade imbalances responses and for those tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and partly on China. He said concerns over the border and fentanyl. And I'm bringing this up because I would expect to hear a lot of messaging around this from the administration, as we are expecting the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent as soon as today to file a brief to the Solicitor General, which means that the White House might have their sights set on appealing this all the way up to the Supreme Court. Now, I think it's worth mentioning here, Joe and Kriti, that historically the courts have really been deferential to presidents when it comes to their ability to invoke national emergencies. But at the same time, we've never seen a White House invoke IEEPA in order to impose tariffs, let alone ones that are so broad ranging. Now, I don't need to tell either of you that there are trillions of dollars at stake here when it comes to this decision. I was pretty struck by a recent analysis from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which found that if the Supreme Court upholds this ruling, 71% of the expected tariff revenue for this year would all but vanish. But that doesn't mean that tariffs or the revenue with them are going away completely. A person familiar tells us here at Bloomberg News that the administration is looking at other federal authorities to invoke tariffs going forward, even as they plan to appeal this ruling.
Tyler, you're talking about trillions really at stake here when it comes to this particular court ruling. Talk to us about how this bleeds into the corporate space. We know that the White House has been in the kind of back and tug of war, a little bit of love and hate when it comes to NVIDIA. Now another major chip company in the crosshairs. Walk us through it.
Right, exactly. And Kriti, you're highlighting really what we saw come to light today as that tension, that push and pull between this administration as well as chip makers. We saw them mirror a similar move to last week that impacted Samsung and SK Hynix, essentially revoking TSMC's authorization to freely ship essential gear to its mainland Chinese operation base. Now, the administration here has really highlighted these companies as ones that are willing to work with the White House. They've pledged to reshore manufacturing, but then on the other hand, you also have them now policing their actions abroad, and that could lead to some difficulties ahead. An administration official tells us here at Bloomberg News that U.S. officials alerted TSMC recently that they were going to revoke what's known as their validated end user status. Think of that sort of as a blanket permission, and now the company is going to need to essentially seek individual approvals. But we know that that could pose some difficulty considering that the U.S. is already dealing with a backlog of export licenses. All of this to say that it just adds some uncertainty to the picture here, particularly as the U.S. has been trying to court these chip makers to get on board with President Trump's reshoring and manufacturing vision.
Boy, there's a lot there, Tyler. Thank you so much from a beautiful North Lawn. On this first week of September, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall at the White House. This TSMC headline is really something, Kriti. In the process of talking about reshoring, we're also talking about upsetting the Chinese at a period of time in which we were supposed to be in talks about a deal. That's where Michelle Jamrisko comes in with her expertise on the Global South with us now in Washington, D.C. Michelle, it's great to see you. Yeah, revoking Taiwan Semiconductor's authorization to freely ship essential gear to its main Chinese chip-making base, just as President Xi sits down with Prime Minister Modi and Vladimir Putin for a weekend of festivities ahead of the big military parade tomorrow. Bloomberg is writing about the redrawing of geopolitical lines. Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, a lot to unpack from the weekend's events, especially with all three leaders, Presidents Xi, Modi, and Putin, all kind of getting together at the, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meetings, and had bilateral meetings as well. Yeah, you can call it a redrawing of the global map. I think we're seeing a lot of this sort of culminating energy around the sort of BRICS countries and others that are finding, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They're coming together with this frustration over the Trump tariffs, and they're finding ways to resolve, or at least move to resolve, decades-old disputes that they have with each other. You saw it with Xi and Modi talking about resolving border disputes that came to blows at different times, and talking about counterterrorism operations, and building their own bilateral trade ties, restarting direct flights between their two countries, and all of it. I think what you can see among those three leaders is a sort of almost taunting signal to the U.S. These photos, these embraces, handshakes, smiles all over social media. Modi calling Putin, saying it was always a delight to meet with President Putin, all kind of meant to needle at President Trump, who has so far not taken the bait and typically likes to kind of pretend BRICS doesn't exist and doesn't have the power that it thinks it might have.
How much of this, though, is just a expansion of an economic relationship that really has already existed, especially when it comes to the likes of India and Russia, for example? Oil, defense, it feels like this has been in the works for quite some time.
Yeah, I think in that case, it's certainly just a doubling down of their warm economic ties. We did see where, this is crossing into the Ukraine-Russia situation. Modi reportedly spoke with President Zelensky before his meeting with Putin, before leaving for that trip. And Zelensky had said that he was assured that India would bring the appropriate message, the appropriate signals to Russia in that. I'm not sure he got what he wanted out of that bilateral meeting that happened between Putin and Modi, but certainly that is an element here that they're playing. India and Russia are trying to play to their advantage, saying, we're not giving up these decades-old ties either, even though we might not agree on everything that goes on with the relationship and with the war itself. They're setting that aside. It's all economy and economic ties for them in those meetings.
The idea of Prime Minister Modi for 50 minutes in Vladimir Putin's limousine, after we saw Putin do the same with Trump for only 5 minutes. Yeah. I'm sure it was not a coincidence. What were they talking about? What happened in that car?
And that's what I mean when I say, this is perhaps some sort of taunting signal. Our colleagues on the other side called it limo diplomacy. And as you mentioned, after this remarkable invitation by President Trump to have Putin in his vehicle, in the beast, as we call it, with all the security implications that sends, for Putin to turn around and then do the same for Modi at a time when both countries are having very tense relationships with the U.S. It certainly does send a sort of diplomatic signal in some ways. We don't know the details of what they discussed, but there's still plenty on the table between Modi and Putin, and certainly, I think how to kind of help together thwart the Trump tariff energy was probably top of the list.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, those are three key, of course, allies now in Asia as well. But the secondary sanctions bit is so interesting to me because this is something that Donald Trump has really taken a very fierce step forward on. Mm-hmm. You now have European leaders say they're going to be doing the same thing, especially when it comes to targeting China, India. It's been put out in the ether. Whether it actually happens is a different story. Right. How effective could that be?
Yeah, well, it'll certainly change the game because as to this point, we haven't had China be involved in that direct target of secondary sanctions, as we're awaiting certainly a leaders summit between Trump and Xi, a sort of thawing of that sort of trade relationship. And of course, we got the 90-day extension of the trade truce with China just last month, just a couple weeks ago. So there's kind of a holding pattern that we have right now between the U.S. and China. But India, as well as some others, are asking, well, why just us? If you're going to do secondary sanctions, what's going on with China? Why aren't you targeting them for these same penalties?
So let's talk about secondary tariffs, as the president put it at the time, secondary sanctions. The deadline just passed. It was a 50-day deadline. Remember that? We just passed it, I think, 2 days ago here, having been revised multiple times. There's no end in sight when it comes to the fighting. There's no actual deal or hope, it seems right now, for even a ceasefire. At what point do these secondary sanctions take effect?
Well, we certainly have a lot of overlapping deadlines.
That's
so
true.
I think you have
you can't
2-week
keep track
deadline.
Of it anymore.
We've got the 90-day truce with China. We've got deadlines that have been threatened. And as you know, Joe, the president is fond of saying in 2 weeks.
That's right.
Using that for many different issues. So we'll have to see how these kind of coalesce. I think we will probably hear from the president today in some form that speaks to the nature of these issues. He's been, I think, loath to comment directly on these leaders' meetings of the triumvirate of folks that we've been talking about today, because he doesn't want to lend credence to any leverage or power that gives them against the U.S. right now. So we'll have to see. I see where these other powers are kind of playing their own game, trying to play Trump off himself, and so we'll see how those conversations go. But obviously, when you have these conversations going on 3 different tracks with 3 different countries, and Trump wants to win them all, it's going to get a little sticky.
Yeah. Great analysis from Michelle Jamrisko, as always, balancing the White House and national security and the stories that she's reporting on and editing here in Washington, D.C. Kriti, let's assemble the panel. They're both with us today. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeanne is a democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, Bloomberg Politics contributor, of course. I'd like to get into this with both of you. We've been talking about it for a couple of years with regard to the war in Ukraine, with regard to Russia, and of course America's relationship with China, which has evolved in interesting ways between both the Biden and the Trump administrations. Rick, what went through your mind when you saw these images from over the weekend? Putin, Xi, Modi, hugging, laughing, talking together in China, not to mention Modi and Putin together in a vehicle for almost an hour. These lines are being rewritten before our eyes. Is it because of the Trump administration?
Well, you didn't see this kind of participation just a few years ago with these dialogues. So it is a troublesome situation. Troublesome that we don't have a better relationship today with India, somewhat sparked by the punitive tariffs that President Trump has put on them. But I'd point out another one. Turkey's Erdogan was there too, and he's a member of NATO. So we have a NATO member sitting in a group with, all of our global antagonists, and so it's got to be a warning shot for the Trump administration and their national security group to start getting serious about how they play these global affairs. Because even though America First says, "Oh, let them do whatever they want to do," this is not good for democracy and freedom around the world.
Jeanne, hop on in here in this conversation. I feel like we've been focusing so much on the negatives of this. Let me take my Debbie Doomsday hat off for a moment and put my positive one on. If we start to see relations between the United States thaw with either Putin, Xi, or with Modi, does that have a cascading effect on this trio?
It possibly could. And I wish, Kriti, I could join you and be optimistic, but I am so not. I think in terms of foreign policy, this administration just 8 months in, it has really been a disaster. You look at just the impact of the tariffs on our alliances. If you're going to confront and compete with China, the one thing you need is allies. You cannot win this competition without them. And what does he do? He goes and he inflicts tariffs on our closest allies, including, as you guys were just talking about, India, secondary tariffs. And of course, they thumb their nose at him, and Modi goes right over and is now with Xi Jinping and Putin. So yes, a thaw in relations could be beneficial, but I'm deeply worried that things have gotten too far now, and the president promising his promise about 24 hours he could, make Ukraine safe again, end the war. You look at what's going on in the Middle East, you look at our relationships with India, the entire world has now reconfigured or is in that process, even Japan meeting with Xi Jinping recently, and that's as a result of these policies. So I am not as optimistic, although I will try to be when I come back and talk to you next.
Ever the optimist. I don't know. It sounds to me like the secondary sanctions could have quite an impact right now, which is something that Rick Davis has been calling for a couple of years. Our great panel will be back with a lot more to talk about as we turn to domestic politics. Rick Davis and Jeanne, Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributors with us here on the Tuesday, even though it feels like a Monday edition of Balance of Power. We'll take a look at Wall Street. Lisa Mathieu checking stocks for us with a new whiff of uncertainty in the air over tariffs. And we've got Kriti Gupta with us today in Washington, D.C. And for the next several weeks, we'll be back with a lot more smart talk from Washington by way of Wall Street straight ahead. I'm Joe Mathieu in the nation's capital, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. And make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. Go to Apple, Spotify, you know the drill, wherever you get your podcasts. Find the show and subscribe. Watch us live on YouTube and listen anytime at Bloomberg.com.
It is 1:21 on Wall Street. I'm Lisa Mathieu. Some trade uncertainty in the air. Traders also looking ahead to the labor market data out later this week. The jobs report comes out on Friday. Ahead of it right now, stocks are lower. We have the Nasdaq down nearly 1.5%. The Dow off about 0.9%. The S&P 500 off more than 1%. The 2-year yield 3.64%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.27%, and that's up about 4 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. That's up about 0.5%. Checking with other currencies, the Japanese yen down 0.7%, the euro down 0.5%, the British pound down more than 1%. Some IPO news. Fintech company Klarna, some of its shareholders, they're looking to raise as much as $1.27 billion. This is as the company revives that New York IPO that was delayed earlier this year. Then we go to BlackRock Coffee Bars, looking to raise as much as $265 million in an IPO. It'll become the largest publicly traded coffee retailer on a U.S. exchange, joining rivals like Starbucks, and Dutch Brothers. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mathieu. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Lisa Mathieu with us today. Great to have you along for the ride, Lisa. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, and this is Balance of Power. Alongside Kriti Gupta here in the nation's capital, in for Kaylee Lines. As we turn our attention to domestic politics, Kriti, we've been talking so much about the potential for National Guard troops or federal law enforcement to enter Chicago has been the next city that President Trump has highlighted here. Of course, they're on the streets of Washington, D.C. He's suggested other cities like New York might get that treatment next. All of this, of course, began in Los Angeles a couple of months ago.
And at the time, even when he was threatening Los Angeles, no one really took it that seriously. This was an unthinkable move in terms of troops, in terms of actually the legalities around it. And now we find out, well, it's actually not legal to do that.
Well, we did get a court ruling that's going to raise some real questions about going into other cities. The president has a lot of leeway here in Washington, D.C., in the federal city. It's not like that when you go into another state with an executive that actually is the commander-in-chief of the National Guard. So here we are, the judge ruling here that the president's deployment in L.A., this was in June, against the immigration crackdown, violated federal law, with much to wonder about the way forward. We assemble our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are both with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors here on the Tuesday edition. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. Jeanne, Democracy Visiting Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center and Bloomberg Politics contributor. You know, one thing, Jeanne, that Donald Trump has always said since he got back in the White House is that he will comply with court orders. Could this slow down the role of National Guard troops, if not federal law enforcement in other parts of the country?
You know, it absolutely could, but I'll tell you, I am doubtful that it is going to slow down this administration, and I'll tell you why. Very much like his imposition of the tariffs, which is something he has talked about almost his entire adult life. He has been fixated on violence in Chicago for much of his life. He built the Trump Tower there. He has talked about it since before he ran for election the first time, continued right through to the current moment, I think as early as today, if I'm reading my Truth Social right. So I'm not sure this is going to slow him down. The other thing is that we also have a Supreme Court decision just earlier, a few months ago, in which they said they won't allow federal district court judges to impose nationwide injunctions, which raises the question, is Judge Breyer's ruling just for his district, or does it apply nationwide? So as much as I would like to think this may slow things down so we could get a real decision out of the Supreme Court, I'm not sure it's going to slow down this administration.
Rick, weigh in here. Do you agree with Jeanne on that point? Does this serve as some sort of deterrent when it comes to other cities across the United States? Or at the end of the day, could this simply be just something that happens months after the actual action of putting troops in those cities? How do you view it?
Yeah, Kriti, I think this is exactly what Trump is looking for. He wants to test the legal boundaries of a very powerful presidency, and he's done it in various ways, and this is just one of the most current ways that he has said, sue me. I'm going to deploy these troops. I'm going to stake out an emergency. I'm going to take the powers that the Constitution gives me and exert them. It would not surprise, and then, by the way, take me to the Supreme Court, where he's running a pretty good track record right now. And so I have no doubts that there are voices inside the White House saying, great, this is exactly what we planned. we want to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. If we are given the authority by the Supreme Court to deploy National Guard troops anywhere we want for basically any reason we want, this is what they're looking for. They want that carte blanche, and they want it within the first year of their presidency. So I think we see this playing out exactly the way they wanted it.
Well, Donald Trump on Truth Social, to your point, Jeanne, today, this is just a couple of hours ago, at least 54 people, he writes, were shot in Chicago over the weekend. 8 people were killed. The last 2 weekends were similar. The president writes, Chicago is the worst and most dangerous city in the world. And I'm looking at a list of cities by homicide rate. The first American city that appears on the list is, in fact, New Orleans, and that's at position 28. It is followed by Memphis and a few others here. Before you get that far down the list, Jeanne, it's pretty much all in Mexico or in Central America. The president doesn't actually think Chicago is the most dangerous city in the world, I presume, right?
Not if he is looking at the data, but as we know, he is not fond of looking at data. He is fond of finding data or creating his own reality and talking about it. And he very much believes that Chicago is violent. And we should not underestimate the fact that 54 shootings over a weekend of Labor Day is stunning. It is violent. It needs to be addressed. The problem here is, as this federal judge said, the president doesn't have the power under the Comitatus Act to do this. It is an overreach of his power. He does not have the ability to set up a nationwide police force as it is under his power. And so that is the problem for Donald Trump, which is why I think last week in that long extended cabinet meeting that you sat through, Joe, he said, I want to be invited in. And of course, he's not going to be invited in either by Mayor Johnson or by the governor. But it is very much in keeping, to Rick's point, with what the Republican administration here has been really wanting to do, not just to address crime, which they think is a winning issue for them, but immigration as well.
Jeanne, from a state rights perspective, we know that the mayor of Chicago has been very vocal about just how welcome those troops would be. What more can they do, Chicago and other cities across the country?
Well, they are going to have to read carefully this federal judge's decision. I think, if the president does send troops in uninvited, they will take him to court and follow that. We heard the mayor of Chicago say that his police force would not cooperate with law enforcement. There are other more moderate Democrats and Republicans saying maybe the governor and the mayor should try to work with the president to address crime. But I just don't see that in the offing, in part because of the politics of this thing, because we know that Pritzker, just like Newsom, has designs on the White House himself potentially. And so this does give him a way to make a national forum for him to take his case to Americans beyond Illinois.
Well, Rick, you wonder if the president is going to need to rewrite the sort of baseline foundation, the real motivation for using these troops, not unlike the ruling on tariffs. If he can rewrite the tariff emergency and create another reason to keep the tariffs in place, certainly he can find another reason to put National Guard troops in different cities in America, correct? This is something they've likely gamed out at the White House already, no?
Sure. At a minimum, they have already been saying that they're using the National Guard troops to support the immigration plans, which means that you have federal troops supporting the function of a federal law enforcement officer, which actually gives him better standing, within the legal system. There'll always be a reason for this administration to try to do what they're going to do. They're extremely good at finding cause and effect. And even the president's comments on Truth Social this morning about these 54 shootings, you don't have to be ranked number one. It's always an overgrasp for him. But most people would look at that and go, wow, that's a dangerous place if 54 people were shot at, in Chicago this weekend. And so he does play on the fears of people when they say these things. And of course, then he always takes it a little bit too far. But the reality is, I don't think he is going to suffer the desire to find a reason to do it. He's just going to execute upon the path that he even talked about doing during the campaign. He said he was going to put these troops in these cities. and yet people voted for him. Now, when you look at the polls, you see that there's little support for putting National Guard troops in a law enforcement position in these cities. So I would say the really only thing that can control this is the bad political effect that may take place because of it.
Rick, I'm going to ask you maybe a very obvious question here, but are there any Republican cities that could be on the radar of the Trump administration right now?
Oh, well, there should be. In other words, if you're making the argument that these are dangerous cities, I think 3 of the top 5 are in red states as far as crime goes. And so, but that's not what this is about. This is about politics. It's got nothing to do with crime fighting. Donald Trump isn't going to deploy National Guard troops in these states without a close cooperation with the governor, and probably more likely a border state dealing with border issues like he's done in the past. So, we pretend sometimes to say that these arguments that are made in public policy realms are legitimate. This is politics directing policy, not the other way around.
Yeah, we've heard of a couple that they might be looking at, including the aforementioned Memphis, and the administration has suggested that, yes, it will be looking in those areas. Question from a terminal user here, Jeanne, with regard to Chicago. He writes, we could hate Trump for going to Chicago, but the city's been a mess for decades. What is the counter from local officials?
I think that's a great question. And this is where I mentioned before, you do have some voices on moderates on both the Democratic and Republican side saying, hold on, let's work together. Why doesn't the governor invite the president in? But to be clear that he can't just come in without being invited, and they have to have a plan as to what they're going to do to combat crime, hiring more police officers, better training, all the things that we could do to address these issues. Because to the terminal user's point, Chicago has been violent, as have many cities for a long time. The problem here is that Chicago, if you're really looking at the data, is not nearly the most violent city. And of course, you just mentioned Memphis. The Tennessee governor sent National Guard troops to Washington, D.C., when 2 of his own cities are far more violent than Washington, D.C. Why aren't those troops in his home city? So there's a lot of politicking here, to Rick's point. And I think the danger for the Trump administration politically is that polling-wise, this is, at least at this point, wildly unpopular. The American public, particularly independents, do not want armed troops on the nation's streets. But they do, to the terminal user's point, want to combat crime, and we should all want to do that. So hopefully there's a way they can work together to make this happen.
Great conversation with Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Thank you both for the insights. We will keep talking about this, something tells me, in the future. I want to mention a quick breaker here. Headline crossed the terminal a short time ago. We told you it was coming. Joni Ernst reports last week, now made official. The senator from Iowa says she will not seek re-election next year, and she's up with a video post making that formal announcement today. This is Bloomberg.
It is 1:40 on Wall Street. I'm Lisa Mathieu. Tech stocks leading the losses on this shortened trading week. We'll start with the NASDAQ, down more than 1%. All mega caps are falling, with NVIDIA seeing its longest drop since March. NVIDIA shares down more than 2.5%. Let's hit to the Dow, down about 0.7%. The S&P 500, that's off about 0.9%. In the yield space, we have the 2-year, 3.64%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.27%, and that's up about 4 basis points. To commodities, WTI crude up about 2.5%, $65 a barrel. We have COMEX gold at $3,589 an ounce. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, well, that's up about 0.4%. Few companies making news. Nestle turning to the executive who runs its Nespresso coffee empire to lead the company. And this is after it was hit by the second CEO firing in little over a year. American Vogue, well, it's named Chloe Mall as its new editor, and she's succeeding Anna Wintour tour. Now, Mal is the daughter of director Louis Mal, also actress Candice Bergen. Wintour does remain chief content officer for Condé Nast. And finally, McDonald's bringing back its extra value meals. The deals begin September 8th and include a few limited time items like a Big Mac meal for $8. Meantime, in an interview with CNBC, McDonald's CEO, well, he said the reputation of American brands, it's dimmed, and the company wants to focus on strengthening the brand's identity in local communities. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, you can subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mathieu. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Lisa Mathieu, thank you so much, and thank you for being with us here on the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio. Alongside Kriti Gupta in for Kaylee Lines the next couple of weeks here in the nation's capital. Kriti just in from London with many questions about the stories that are unfolding here. Someday I'm going to have to ask you about what the conversations have been like in London against the backdrop of all the tariffs. Now we've got another court ruling that has brought us to another inflection point, and the markets are clearly not terribly happy. It's interesting. You hear a ruling like that, you think it would be market positive because markets seem to have an allergy to tariffs. Yeah. But it's the uncertainty that seems to be dogging the stocks.
It's the uncertainty, even if it's a penalty, even if it's a tariff, just having a number attached to it is a good thing. But you said, what's the thinking in London? Well, I think the thinking is quite similar to what it is here, which is, what is the thinking in Washington?
Just let us know when you know.
Exactly. Will we know?
Well, there's another thing we don't know a lot about, and that's whether they're going to come up with a funding mechanism for the government after the end of this month. If you ask Chris Murphy of Connecticut, you might wonder. He's suggesting that Donald Trump wants to see a shutdown and was on social media talking about this very thing. You can see it on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube. Trump is rooting for a shutdown, he writes. He knows he has created a huge problem because now any budget deal with Republicans isn't worth the paper it's written on, referring presumably to rescissions, among other things, that have Democrats and Republicans not exactly getting along. Now, we bring all of this up because lawmakers are coming back into town today. It's fly-in day. And we wanted to spend some time with Mick Mulvaney, who's with us in our Washington studio right now, former Republican congressman, co-founder of the Freedom Caucus, of course, former acting chief of staff in the first Trump administration. He ran OMB and has more titles than you could fit on the card. It's great to have you back in studio with us, sir. Welcome.
Kriti, welcome. It's nice to see you.
I guess summer's officially over. Now we get to real business.
Is it? Does it go by Labor Day or do we go by the solstice?
I'm not sure how. Well, I think Labor Day in Washington.
Equinox. It's the equinox, right?
Yeah, right. But that doesn't really matter.
I don't think it
September 30 is what matters.
That's the end of the year.
I feel like it's up to me to start challenging the conventional wisdom.
Go ahead.
When this many people say we're going to shut down, doesn't that mean we're not?
Generally, yes, in this town. And I actually did hear for the first time from a well-placed Republican that they really don't want to shut down. Okay. And they don't think there's going to be one. But I keep coming back again and again to a couple things. Number one, exactly what Murphy said, which is the environment is really, really nasty right now. Yeah. What was Chris really saying? Ignore the part about the president doesn't follow the law. That's just politics. But what he's saying is, look, we passed a spending bill on a bipartisan basis because it takes 60 votes, and then you rescinded on partisan lines. So we agreed to spending together as two parties, and then you rescinded that spending on partisan lines without any Democrats. And that does sort of make a Democrat wonder, why would I ever vote for another spending bill again as long as this president is around?
Sure.
And then you look at something I'm a little bit familiar with, which is executive authority goes up during a government shutdown, which is technically a lapse in funding. And the Office of Management and Budget is actually heavily involved in determining who is essential and non-essential, a term we're familiar with now in this town, right?
This is going to get interesting.
Oh, it is. So you can imagine Russ Vought, who listen, I'm so jealous of Russ. He's having a great time down there.
You're jealous.
Absolutely. I would love to be down there right now. This is fantastic. He sort of gets to sit back and say, okay, Kriti, you're essential. We like what you're doing in the government. And Joe, you're non-essential. So goodbye. So it's really sort of a way to run the government without Congress's input. So I think they might want to shut down. But you're right. When everybody in this town says X, it's usually a good idea to vote Y. And right now, everybody's saying a shutdown.
Can you just walk us through the plumbing a little bit of the shutdown?
Maybe, but it usually puts people to sleep.
No. I'm coming in from London, and the thought in London is, shouldn't tariffs have fixed all the problems when it comes to the budget? Shouldn't the math have come and at least canceled out, maybe not canceled out the entire deficit issues, the entire budget issues, but at least taken some of the pressure off? Is that any...
No, it's not even close.
But is it progress? Even if it's an ounce of progress, even if it's a drop in the bucket?
Well, it's more money. But I mean, look, I've heard Trump say the tariffs have brought in $7 trillion. No, it hasn't. What's $115 billion, I think, is the number. We spent that much during lunchtime today. So, no, I don't think tariffs Tariffs were never designed. They were never designed to plug a fiscal hole. Okay, it's good money. It's additional money. I get it. You and I have talked, Joe, before in the show about how we both thought inflation would go up. It hasn't. So look, it's hard to argue with the facts, and they've not contributed to inflation, and they have generated more government revenue. Period. End of story. No real debate as of right now. But it was never going to plug the fiscal hole to everybody in Washington would go, oh, it's great. We can start spending a bunch of money now. By the way, they just spend money anyway. They don't care about deficits. So whether or not it was plugged or not doesn't really make any difference. Just goes to show you the British are asking about the wrong things.
Okay, well, let's ask about motivations here.
Yeah.
Because it's really interesting what you just mapped out. If you're at the White House right now, you're saying make my day, right?
Yeah.
Please shut down the government. We have a plan for that. And I wish you luck reopening the government.
Yeah.
We've had Democrats say, yeah, we might vote for a shutdown, but only if there's an off-ramp. There's no such thing with this White House, is there?
Not if they keep their keep in mind, when we went through the shutdown in late 2018 into 2019, we felt like we were doing a good job of managing the lapse in appropriations.
That was the record.
Which is what a shutdown. It was the longest shutdown ever. And, I think it's fair to say that, when a Republican is in charge of OMB, you can make a shutdown look very different than when a Democrat is in charge of OMB. The case in point, we kept the monuments open on the National Mall. The Obama administration during their shutdown, put up the barriers and said, if you don't like it, call Congress, right? So, yeah, we do feel like we're able to manage a lapse in appropriations. The only reason that we didn't keep it closed longer in 2019 was because we didn't have the support of the Republicans in the House and the Senate. We had Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell beating us up on us every single day, saying we have to do something about the shutdown. You're not going to get that out of this Republican leadership. So, yeah, I think the more interesting question is, if it does shut down, how does it open? And I don't know the answer to that question.
What would the Trump administration want, though? What's the easiest thing to fix to get that shutdown off the radar?
I don't know if they want one. More rescissions.
Keep it close.
More. I mean, we saw one of the most fascinating things that no one paid attention to was this so-called pocket rescission just a couple days ago. It hasn't been done in a long time. We tried to push it in 2017 and 18 when I was at OMB. We couldn't get the White House counsel to go along with it. They've done it. It's a fascinating tool. Look, I think they want to spend less money, especially in things like USAID. They'd like to shut down those entire programs. Maybe that's what would open it up. But you tell me if a Democrat's going to vote to reopen a shutdown government as part of a deal to shut down a bunch of USAID programs permanently.
So the next rescissions package, or I guess the pocket rescission, that's a sure thing, right? If we're daring you to shut down, then let's keep clawing back what we can is the mentality of the White House.
So the logic is actually quite interesting. You want to talk about getting into the plumbing. An ordinary rescissions package, and I've got half a dozen of them, they got nowhere because what happens is they go to the Hill, and if Congress does nothing, they die. All right? Now, this time, Russ Vought sent one down a couple weeks back, maybe a couple months now, about $9.4 billion, and Congress did act and gave it the thumbs up, and that rescission actually kicked in. This pocket rescission is different. They've got some legal opinions that say, look, if we send you a rescission during the last 45 days of the congressional year, of the fiscal year, if you do nothing, Congress, the rescission is valid. So Congress would have to affirmatively act to undo the rescission. So it sort of flips it on its head when it comes in the last 45 days. It's similar in that fashion to, say, a pocket veto. If this holds, it's a tremendous tool, because what it means is that future administrations in the last 45 days of their administration can really claw back on spending unless Congress does something. And as we all know in this town, Congress is better at doing nothing than it is at doing something.
Is there a political cost to a government shutdown?
Never.
What does that look like?
Hardly ever. Everybody says it costs people votes, and I don't know of a single person who ever changes a vote based on maybe pollsters have got hard data. I don't remember. I've been through, I don't know, Joe, how long have we been here? 6 shutdowns since 2015? I can't remember.
Is that how we're measuring time now?
And I cannot remember a single time.
And Wall Street feels the same way, doesn't it? Because when you reopen the government, presumably someday everything goes right back. Everyone's made whole.
Keep in mind, I
think what they
missed. The best GDP quarter that the Obama administration ever had was the quarter that we had a big shutdown.
Wow. So here we go.
Yeah.
Another rescissions package, another shutdown. Bring us inside the room.
I want to be Russ Vought when I grow up.
Bring us inside the room. We could connect you guys.
Yeah.
For the conversation with Donald Trump on a day like this, when the court says, nope, tariffs are illegal. and then says, actually, some of these other things that you're doing, sending National Guard into L.A. was also illegal. Does the president sit back and say, okay, then, Mick, rewrite it so it's not illegal? Or does he take this as a defeat?
No, he never takes it as a defeat. He does. I thought you were going to say, does he say, let's challenge it at the next level?
Okay.
Because the answer to that question is both.
So yes to both.
He goes to one group and says, all right, so what's our argument at the appellate level, the next appellate level? I think the tariffs just came out of the federal court here in D.C., right? So that'll go to the Supreme Court. Get ready on that. But in case we lose, what's our backup plan? So let's go back and find out our 232s. What other tools have we got? There's this one we're not familiar with, like a 122, which is a 15% for 150 days or something like that. There's all sorts of trade tools the president has, in addition to the ones under IEEPA that just got shot down. So you can do both. We're going to continue to push on the court decisions all the way up to the Supreme Court. And at the same time, if we lose, we're going to start the process to see what we can do that can pass judicial muster.
Well, in terms of getting some of that other alternative sources of revenue, we've already talked about in the past couple of weeks this idea of getting, say, 15% of revenue from corporations as one example. How serious is he about expanding that use? Sadly,
I think he's serious about it. This whole government ownership of private companies, I think, is real. Really disappoints me. I'm not a big fan. You look up the definition of socialism in the dictionary, and it says, included government ownership of the means of production. And last time I checked, we now own the means of producing some chips. Right. So I'm not excited about it. I hope that there's somebody in the White House trying to make the president for the case that why this has always been a bad idea. It never works. But I'm not sure that those voices are really ascendant in the White House.
So who's telling him in the White House that this is a good idea? Would this have happened in the first administration? When you were criticizing Barack Obama for investing in government motors?
Yeah, and maybe we were just too close to it back then. Maybe there's a period of time and now people have forgotten that socialism is a bad thing. I have no idea. Do I think Peter Navarro is capable of making an argument that the government should own U.S. Steel, the government should own GM, the government should own Intel? Yeah, he probably is. But I mean, face it, you can't, as much as I beat up on Peter, and I'd be happy to do it all day long if you want me to, he can't be the only voice. There's got to be other voices in there saying, Mr. President, I think that's a really good idea.
Even Howard Lutnick suggested Lockheed Martin might be that's hard.
This is
it's
just
private
sure,
sector,
why not?
man.
Hey, why not? If we own, let's see, we own critical minerals now.
Yeah.
We own a piece
MP
of U.S. Steel. We own a piece of Intel. Why not? Why don't we own Boeing? It's once you open this door, how do you close it? And that's my question to my Republican friends. Where's my camera? Over here. So when we finally lose control, and the Democrats are in charge, which always happens in this country, pendulums swing back and forth, and they want to go out and buy every solar energy. We thought lending money to Solyndra was a really bad idea. Ooh. How is it going to be when we own Solyndra? I mean, that's where we are going. Now we're arguing about not just even different levels of socialism. It's what are we going to buy? If you're a Republican, you want to buy Lockheed Martin and Intel. If you're a Democrat, you want to buy Solyndra and whatever. I mean, this is who's the better socialist, not the difference. There's not much difference between the two parties at that level. That's why I'm so disappointed about it.
This has happened to me more often, Kriti, when people in the studio are looking directly to the camera to send a message directly to someone.
Yes,
and I'm wondering if is the president watching this thing now? Because you're
yes, he's out there someplace in television land watching me.
He's been responding from time to time, which is why I asked. But
my brother or the president?
The president, yeah. I don't think
my brother responds to me, President.
Oh, your brother. I thought you said your mother. All right, we'll keep it all in the family here, I guess, with Mick Mulvaney. Great to have you back.
He's a huge Bloomberg guy. Huge Bloomberg guy.
Well, I love that. Thank you for being
By the way,
do you know
that David Schweikert has a terminal in his office? He watches you guys every single day.
He's got a terminal.
Yeah.
Did you know that, producer James?
Yeah.
This is wow. How many members have terminals?
I think he may be the only one. I hope I didn't get him in trouble.
We buried the lead today.
Yeah.
This is good news. This is good
you guys
stuff.
have a direct line into the halls of power.
The former congressman and former acting chief of staff at the White House. Thank you for the insights as always, and don't be a stranger. With me here in Washington, Kriti Gupta will meet you for the late edition of Balance of Power, if you're ready to roll.
We're ready to roll.
Delighted to have you as part of the conversation. And by the way, that's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. That'll be after the president's announcement. So we'll have a lot more to talk about right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast on Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform you like. You'll find the program. Watch us live on YouTube and listen anytime at our website, Bloomberg.com.